The date was the 23rd of October, 1944. In the dense, rain-soaked forests near the German border, silence hung heavier than the fog. Wehrmacht sentries scanned the darkness, waiting for the next wave of young Americans to stumble toward their lines. They had seen this before: green troops, frightened voices, confused orders. Another easy night. Or so they thought. Across the no-man's land, something moved quietly, deliberately. No shouted commands, no clatter of boots, just the faint rustle of men trained to hunt in darkness. Within minutes, German outposts began to vanish, one by one. These were not rookies. They were the 104th Infantry Division, the Timberwolves, and they belonged to a commander the Germans would soon learn to fear. His name carried through the fog like a whispered curse: Terry de la Mesa Allen. To his men, he was Terrible Terry, rough, fearless, and utterly relentless. To the enemy, he was the ghost who never slept. Allen was no ordinary general. He had been fired once, disgraced for being too aggressive, too undisciplined for the parade ground. Yet the men who fought under him would have followed him into hell itself, because he always led from the front. He fought wars his own way, at night, up close, and without mercy for hesitation. The legend of Terrible Terry was not born from medals or headlines. It was forged in mud, fire, and the screams of battle from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen woods of Europe. He believed in one thing above all: simplicity saves lives. The simpler the plan, the fewer his men would die. By the time German soldiers realized who they were facing that October night, it was too late. The Timberwolves were already inside their lines. The forest that had once protected them had turned against them, every shadow, every tree, alive with movement. That night, the Wehrmacht learned a new kind of fear. Because that night, the darkness belonged to Terry Allen. Terry de la Mesa Allen was born on April 1st, 1888, at Fort Douglas, Utah Territory, literally inside the U.S. Army. His first lullaby was the sound of bugles and cavalry hooves on dry ground. His father, Colonel Samuel Allen, was a career officer, a product of the old frontier army that moved from post to post, chasing Apache raiders and smugglers. His mother came from a long line of soldiers as well. Her father, Captain Carlos Alvarez de la Mesa, had fought for the Union at Gettysburg, bleeding for a country still struggling to define itself. For the Allens, the army was not a profession. It was inheritance. From the beginning, Terry Allen was restless. He learned to ride before he could read, learned to shoot before he could spell his name. Rules irritated him. Authority was a challenge to be tested, not obeyed. On dusty parade fields across the American West, young Terry watched officers drilling troops under the burning sun and quietly decided he would lead differently. In 1907, Allen earned what every Army family dreamed of: an appointment to West Point. It should have been the culmination of generations of service. Instead, it became his first rebellion. He loathed the Academy's rigid structure, the endless memorization, the mathematical precision that valued obedience over imagination. He stuttered when forced to recite in class and collected demerits like souvenirs. His classmates nicknamed him Tear Around the Mess Hall Allen for his inability to sit still. After repeated failures in mathematics, ordnance, and gunnery, he was finally dismissed in 1911. For most young men, that would have been the end. For Allen, it was a detour. He enrolled at the Catholic University of America, earned a degree in 1912, and through sheer determination, secured a commission as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Cavalry. He had found a way in through the side door, the first of many times he would outsmart the system designed to keep him out. His first test came on the Mexican border in 1913, a world of dust, rustlers, and ambushes. When 30 armed bandits crossed into U.S. territory, Allen, commanding only 6 men, was told to wait for reinforcements. He didn't. He attacked. When it was over, all 30 rustlers were dead or captured. It wasn't by the book, but it worked. That story raced through the ranks, marking him as exactly what he was: a born combat leader who preferred results to regulations. Then came World War I. Like every ambitious young officer, Allen feared the war would end before he could prove himself. When he finally reached France in 1918, he wasn't given a glamorous command. He ran an ammunition train. But even in the mud of supply routes, he paid attention. How men moved under fire, how panic spread, how darkness changed everything. Eventually, he got his wish. Promoted to major, he took command of the 3rd Battalion, 358th Infantry, 90th Division during the Street Mahil and Meuse-Argonne offensives. It was in those blood-soaked fields that he discovered what would become his obsession: night attacks. Military doctrine said you attacked in daylight when you could see the enemy, coordinate artillery, and maintain control. Allen saw only death in that logic. Daylight meant visibility, and visibility meant slaughter. Machine gunners cut down waves of infantry, like wheat. Artillery spotters corrected their fire with deadly precision. Every hill taken by day was paid for with blood. But at night, the battlefield changed. Confusion became an ally. Fear shifted sides. When his battalion struck under cover of darkness, the Germans fired blindly, wasting ammunition and nerves. Allen realized that with the right preparation reconnaissance by day, simple plans, and prearranged signals, the chaos of night could be mastered. Keep it simple, move silent, hit hard, he told his men. On October 24th, 1918, Allen's experiment nearly killed him. Leading a night assault, he was struck in the face by machine gun fire. The medics tagged him for evacuation. Allen refused. He packed gauze over the wound, ordered himself returned to the line, and continued the attack. His soldiers saw their commander blood streaming down his cheek, still giving orders, and followed without hesitation. For that night's action, he earned the Silver Star and 2 Purple Hearts, but the true reward was less tangible, the absolute trust of his men. When the armistice came weeks later, Allen returned home with a scar across his face, and a conviction burned into his mind that discipline wasn't about marching in straight lines or polished boots. It was about getting the mission done and bringing your men home alive. The interwar years would test that belief. Promotions froze, ambition stalled, and the army shrank to a skeleton of its wartime self. Many officers drank or quit. Allen trained. He raced horses across Texas in punishing endurance contests, played polo in Antwerp, studied German tactics, and read everything he could about mechanized warfare. The cavalry was dying, but Allen wasn't. He was waiting for the next war, for the next chance to prove that his kind of soldiering still mattered. And when that war finally came, it would meet a man forged not by privilege or theory, but by failure, scars, and the cold logic of survival. When war returned to Europe in 1939, most of the U.S. Army was still trapped in the horse and bugle era, but one man had spent 20 years preparing for a different kind of fight. Terry de la Mesa Allen was now in his early 50s, grizzled, impatient, and hungry. He had survived obscurity, mastered his craft, and waited long enough. In 1940, General George C. Marshall, newly appointed Army Chief of Staff, noticed him. Marshall had a gift for finding talent hidden beneath bureaucracy. He looked at Lieutenant Colonel Allen and saw not a rule breaker, but a warrior. He promoted Allen directly to Brigadier General, skipping an entire rank, a near unheard-of leap. To the Army establishment, it was madness. To Marshall, it was necessity. America would soon fight a modern war, and modern wars needed men who could win, not just march. By 1942, Allen was given the ultimate test, command of the 1st Infantry Division, the famed Big Red One, the oldest division in the U.S. Army. Its soldiers were proud, but untested in large-scale combat. Marshall's brief to Allen was simple: make them ready. Allen's preparation was brutal. He believed soldiers should suffer more in training than in battle. Long marches, live-fire drills, surprise night alerts. His men cursed him, then later thanked him. He built not parade ground precision, but combat instinct. That instinct was about to face its trial by fire. On the 8th of November 1942, as part of Operation Torch, Allen led the Big Red One ashore near Oran, Algeria, America's first major offensive of the war. The beaches were chaos, surf pounding, machine guns raking the sand, men choking on exhaust and fear. By dusk, they had seized their objectives, but at a cost 418 casualties, including 94 dead. The Americans were finally in the fight. Then came Tunisia, where the war turned savage. Facing Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, the Americans learned hard lessons. At Kasserine Pass, inexperienced units broke and ran under German armor. Tanks burst through defensive lines. Radios failed. Commanders panicked. To many, it looked like the end, but not to Terry Allen. At Jebel El Hamra, he counterattacked. Personally positioning artillery, shouting coordinates through smoke and confusion, Allen rallied his men and stabilized the front. His units captured 400 prisoners. Kasserine became the symbol of American humiliation. Hamra, of its rebirth. A month later came El Guetar, the battle that would define him. On the 21st of March, 1943, German panzers thundered across the desert toward Allen's lines. The sand shook. Staff officers urged him to move his headquarters back. It was standard procedure. Allen refused. I'll like hell pull out, and I'll shoot the first bastard who does. That defiance became legend. His calm under fire steadied the entire division. Soldiers who might have faltered instead dug in. Artillery and tank destroyers opened up at point-blank range. When the smoke cleared, the Germans were retreating the first time American forces had defeated veteran German armor in a stand-up fight. In the words of one private, "If the general stayed, so did we." From El Getar, the Big Red One drove east. By May 1943, they helped capture Tunis, ending the North African campaign. In just 6 months, Allen had turned raw Americans into battle-hardened professionals. His division was bloodied, but it had proven a truth. With the right leadership, American soldiers could beat the Wehrmacht. Next came Sicily and the hardest test yet. Operation Husky, the Allied invasion, began on the 10th of July 1943. General George Patton personally chose Allen's division to land at Gela, the toughest beach on the island. Within hours, German and Italian armor counterattacked. Allen's men held, firing from dunes and scrub, while naval guns blasted enemy tanks just yards away. Patton later said that any other division might have folded. The Big Red One didn't. Then came Troina, a mountain fortress guarding the roads through Sicily. From July 31 to August 6, Allen's troops assaulted it day after day, enduring 24 German counterattacks. The town changed hands multiple times. The slopes ran red with blood. Under relentless artillery and heat, the division fought with mechanical persistence, tired, half-strength, but unbreakable. When Troina finally fell, the Germans withdrew. The road to Messina lay open. That victory, however, carried a hidden cost. Allen's men adored him maybe too much. Their confidence blurred into arrogance. Discipline slipped. They sang bawdy songs on marches, ignored parade standards, and referred to their general as Terry instead of Sir. To them, it was affection. To higher command, it was anarchy. On the 9th of August 1943, Time magazine hit newsstands with Allen's portrait on its cover, calling him a great division commander in the making. 2 days earlier, he had been relieved of command. Omar Bradley, his corps commander, believed Allen and his deputy, Theodore Roosevelt Jr., had allowed discipline to erode. Others claimed the decision came from Eisenhower and Patton, who wanted a steadier hand for the long war ahead. It was, as Eisenhower later admitted, a terrible injustice to General Allen to hint that he was relieved for inefficiency. Bradley himself confessed that none excelled the unpredictable Terry Allen in the leadership of troops. But reputations in war are fragile. One moment, you're the hero on the cover of Time, the next, you're gone. When he boarded the ship home, Allen didn't rage. He lit a cigarette and said only, "I guess they want a different kind of soldier." Maybe they did. But the war wasn't finished with him yet. They thought he was finished. Fired at the height of his fame, dismissed as too reckless, too undisciplined, Terry de la Mesa Allen should have faded into history. But men like Allen don't retire quietly. He was a fighter, and fighters only rest when there's nothing left to fight for. In October 1943, he was given a second chance command of a brand new unit, the 104th Infantry Division, training at Camp Adair, Oregon. These were not seasoned professionals like the Big Red One. They were young Americans from the factories and farms of the West, average age barely 21. They had never seen Europe, much less combat. To most generals, this would have been a disappointment. To Allen, it was a blank canvas. He looked at those fresh faces and saw potential. "They don't know fear yet," he told a staff officer. "Good. We'll teach them how to use it." His method was brutal. Standard Army training required 10 to 12 hours a week of field exercises. Allen pushed his men through 30 to 35 hours, often 6 days straight. They trained in driving rain, in forests so dark they could not see the man next to them. He introduced live ammunition, real artillery, smoke, and confusion, everything that would make training feel like battle. Above all, he made night fighting their specialty. "If you can fight in the dark," he said, "you can fight anywhere." Every aspect of training revolved around darkness navigation by compass and terrain memory, hand signals instead of radios, silent movement through underbrush, flanking maneuvers under the moonlight. He drilled his soldiers to the point of exhaustion, then kept drilling. Some officers protested that it was excessive. Allen replied, "You think I'm tough? Wait until the Germans see you coming." Oh. By mid-1944, the Timberwolves had become the only American division specifically trained for night combat. Bradley himself would later admit, "Allen brought the only division I know of that was prepared for night fighting." In the summer of 1944, as Europe burned, the 104th crossed the Atlantic. They landed in France, then moved into Belgium as autumn fell. On the 23rd of October 1944, they entered combat near the German border the very night that would mark Allen's redemption. The Germans waiting in those forests expected an easy defense. Intelligence briefings called the 104th, a new American division, untested in battle. Wehrmacht veterans laughed. They would not be laughing long. That night, Allen struck. His troops advanced silently through the fog. Small teams slipped between trees, guided by compass bearings memorized from daylight reconnaissance. Sentinels vanished before they could raise alarms. Machine guns barked into empty darkness. When German reinforcements arrived, the attackers were already gone, striking somewhere else. It was psychological warfare as much as tactical brilliance. The enemy no longer trusted the night. Shadows became threats, silence became dread. By dawn, entire German platoons had been overrun. Their reports spoke of an American division that fought like demons after dark. For months, the pattern repeated. On November 2, the 104th crossed the Mark River under cover of darkness, catching defenders completely by surprise. In mid-November, they attacked the Aachen sector, cracking positions that had resisted daylight assaults for weeks. Every move was executed with the precision of a rehearsed nightmare. Then came winter and the Battle of the Bulge. When the Germans launched their last great offensive in December 1944, Allen's division held the northern flank from the 15th of December 1944 to the 22nd of February 1945. Under relentless artillery and freezing snow, they absorbed the shock of multiple attacks, refusing to yield. When the counteroffensive began, the Timberwolves pushed forward again. On February 23, they crossed the Roer River at night, of course, and drove straight into Germany. The momentum never stopped. Cologne fell on March 5, the Rhine on March 22, and within 9 days, the division advanced 193 miles, cutting deep into the heart of the Reich. But war's worst lesson awaited at Nordhausen, in central Germany. On the 11th of April, 1945, the 104th Infantry Division and the 3rd Armored Division liberated a camp that even battle-hardened soldiers could barely comprehend. Thousands of corpses lay unburied, hundreds of survivors barely alive, too weak to speak. The air reeked of decay. Allen walked through the camp in silence. He ordered photographers to document everything: the bodies, the barracks, the faces. "No one will believe this," he said. He then commanded German civilians from the nearby town to come and see what had been done in their name. Some tried to claim ignorance. Allen didn't care. "You will see," he told them. "You will bury them." Even his toughest men wept. That day, Terrible Terry was no longer the loud, profane field general. He was a man staring into the abyss, realizing that victory was never enough to balance the cost. Days later, the 104th fought one last battle, the Battle of Halle, April 15, 1945. House-to-house combat turned the industrial city into rubble. During the chaos, Allen met Count Felix von Luckner, the famed World War I sea devil, now an old man trying to save his city from annihilation. Under a flag of truce, the two soldiers, enemies by uniform but brothers by profession, negotiated a partial surrender that spared thousands of civilians. When it was over, Allen ordered a ceasefire. Halle still stood. Von Luckner would later be made an honorary colonel of the 104th, a rare tribute between warriors who understood each other's code. On April 26, near the Elbe River, Timberwolf patrols made contact with Soviet forces advancing from the east. The war in Europe was all but over. For 200 days, the 104th Infantry Division had fought without a single major defeat. Every objective assigned, they had taken. Every line held, they had kept. Wehrmacht intelligence files recovered after the war confirmed what German soldiers already knew. The 104th Infantry Division had changed how the enemy fought. German units now maintained higher night alerts, spread their defenses thinner, and feared the silence before dawn. Axis propagandist Rita Zucker, Axis Sally, complained on radio that the Americans' night attacks were unfair. Allen heard the broadcast and smiled. "If the enemy says it's unfair," he said, "then it's working." By May, the war in Europe was ending. But for Terry Allen, redemption had already come months earlier in the whispers of German soldiers who warned one another in terror. Beware the Timberwolves. The night belongs to Terrible Terry. For every general who followed the book, there was one who rewrote it. Terry de la Mesa Allen was that man, the one who proved that leadership was not about rank or decorum, but about knowing what kept men alive when the sun went down. Within the American High Command, Allen was a paradox. George C. Marshall, the architect of victory, defended him as a natural warrior, rough-edged but indispensable. Marshall once wrote, "Allen drinks too much, swears too much, and fights too well to be left behind." For Omar Bradley, he was a lesson in contradiction, brilliant in the field, troublesome in garrison. Bradley admitted that none excelled the unpredictable Terry Allen in leading troops, yet he also confessed that Allen's informality made superiors uneasy. Dwight D. Eisenhower admired Allen's results, but feared his reputation. As Supreme Commander, Eisenhower had to balance battlefield success with the political image of the U.S. Army disciplined, orderly, a reflection of democracy in uniform. Allen, with his unshaven jaw, his profanity, and his contempt for ceremony, didn't fit that picture. He was too raw for the press conferences and too honest for the corridors of power. Yet among soldiers, the ones who actually fought Allen was almost mythic. He was the general who didn't hide behind maps. He slept on the same frozen ground, ate the same rations, and cursed the same mud. To them, he wasn't General Allen. He was simply Terry, the man who led from the front and never ordered what he wouldn't do himself. From the enemy's perspective, Allen was worse than a name, he was a legend. Wehrmacht field reports captured after the war described the 104th Infantry Division as a special American formation trained to operate in darkness. German commanders were forced to keep troops awake through the night, fearing sudden attacks that came like ghosts through the trees. Exhaustion spread. Morale collapsed. German prisoners interrogated after the Aachen and Mark River battles spoke of the American wolves who came at night. Some claimed that even the sound of distant footsteps in the dark was enough to trigger panic fire. What Allen had created wasn't just a tactic, it was psychological warfare perfected. Axis propagandists recognized it too. The infamous broadcaster, Rita Zuka, known as Axis Sally, accused the Americans of cowardly night fighting. To Allen, that was the highest compliment. "If the enemy complains," he said, "you're doing it right." Outside the battlefield, military theorists began to take notice. Allen's doctrine, simple plans, silent movement, aggressive initiative, was adopted in fragments by other divisions. His emphasis on night training prefigured the tactics of later generations. From Korea, where U.S. forces learned to fight in the hills after dark, to Vietnam, where search and destroy missions relied on stealth and coordination. Even today, the U.S. Army's Night Operations Manual carries echoes of Allen's philosophy: clarity over complexity, realism over ritual. His approach also resonated with America's allies. Canadian General Guy Simons, who fought alongside the 104th in 1945, remarked, "Once the Timberwolves got their teeth into the Boche, they showed great dash." To Simons, Allen represented the American genius for adaptation, a commander who took inexperience and turned it into innovation. Back home, the press struggled to categorize him. Was he a hero or a renegade? In 1943, Time magazine had praised his courage and charisma. By 1944, journalists were describing him as the general who fought the wrong kind of war for the right reasons. War correspondent Ernie Pyle, beloved by the troops, summed it up best. Terry Allen didn't give a damn for hell or high water. He fought because he loved fighting and because his men believed in him. In the broader scope of Allied strategy, Allen's impact was subtle but lasting. He never commanded armies or won sweeping campaigns. What he did was prove a principle that flexibility, initiative, and human connection could outperform any doctrine written in peacetime. His leadership was personal, even messy, but it produced soldiers who didn't break. For Germany, Allen's night fighters became a persistent nightmare. For America, he became proof that the citizen soldier, the unpolished factory worker or farm boy, could match the most professional army in the world when given trust, training, and purpose. As the war drew to its close, Eisenhower reportedly said of Allen, "He is not the kind of man we could have built an army around. But he is the kind of man that army needed to win a war." And that was the truth of Terrible Terry. He wasn't the symbol of perfection America wanted. He was the reminder of what victory actually required. When the guns fell silent in May 1945, Europe lay in ruins, but Terry de la Mesa Allen stood vindicated. He had commanded 2 divisions across 2 continents, forged victories out of chaos, and turned ordinary Americans into soldiers the Germans feared. Yet, as the parades rolled through liberated cities, Allen knew he had no place in the peace that followed. He retired from active duty on the 31st of August 1946, with the rank of Major General. He never received the 3rd star he once seemed destined for. The same qualities that made him brilliant in war, his aggression, his informality, his contempt for bureaucracy, made him impossible in peacetime. The army that needed him in 1943 had no room for him in 1946. But Allen didn't mind. He had lived his life the only way he knew on the front line, close enough to smell the cordite and hear his soldiers breathe. "I've had enough of desks," he told a reporter. "The war was my home." In the years that followed, he settled quietly in El Paso, Texas, near Fort Bliss, where his father had once served. Locals often saw him in worn khaki shirts, sharing stories at a diner, laughing too loudly, drinking just enough to stir old ghosts. To many young officers, he seemed like a relic, a throwback to the rough frontier army that had vanished. But to those who knew his story, he was something more, a symbol of the soldier's heart flawed, fierce, and loyal beyond reason. Then, in October 1967, tragedy struck. His only son, Lieutenant Colonel Terry de la Mesa Allen Jr., commanding the 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry Regiment, the same unit his father had once led in World War I, was killed in action near Lai Khe, Vietnam. His battalion had walked into a deadly ambush by 2 Viet Cong regiments. Allen Jr. was shot multiple times while trying to rally his men. He died as he had lived leading from the front. When the telegram arrived, the old general said nothing. Witnesses recalled him sitting on his porch, staring into the desert. His hands shook, but his eyes stayed dry. He was proud, a family friend later said. But something inside him broke that day. In the months after his son's death, Allen's health declined rapidly. Strokes, heart trouble, and the slow erosion of will. He'd fought every enemy he ever met, his wife said softly, but he couldn't fight this one. On the 12th of September 1969, Terrible Terry Allen, the cavalryman, the maverick, the night fighter, died at age 81. They buried him at Fort Bliss National Cemetery beside his son. Father and son, 2 soldiers, 2 wars, 1 legacy. Today, at the United States Military Academy at West Point, the institution that once expelled him for failing mathematics now presents the General Terry de la Mesa Allen Award each year to the cadet who demonstrates the highest leadership in military science. The academy that couldn't contain him in youth now honors his name in perpetuity. It is one of history's gentlest ironies. The rebel returned as a role model. For historians, Allen remains a study in contradiction. He never commanded armies or shaped grand strategy. He didn't invent new weapons or draft new doctrines. What he did was simpler and harder. He taught men how to win. He proved that trust, toughness, and truth mattered more than polish or protocol. To his soldiers, he was the man who stood beside them in the dirt. To his enemies, he was the shadow that haunted their nights. To posterity, he is a reminder that victory often belongs not to the perfect, but to the relentless. In an interview late in life, Allen once said, "Discipline is not about looking good. It's about staying alive. A soldier who fights for his buddy will do more for you than any manual ever written." That was his gospel. So when we think of the Big Red One charging through Tunisia, or the Timberwolves crossing the Rhine in the dead of night, we're really thinking of the same man, the restless cavalry officer who refused to quit, even when the army itself turned against him. The German veterans who fought him in those dark forests of Belgium remembered his tactics long after the war ended. They called his soldiers the wolves of the night. They remembered his name whispered in warning Terrible Terry. And maybe, on some cold night, when the world once again forgets what kind of courage it takes to face the dark, we should remember him too, the general who proved that light doesn't always defeat darkness. Sometimes, it learns to fight inside it. Bravery is not about winning, but about standing firm when it matters most. Subscribe to WWII Tales of Valor and tell us which act of courage from this story inspired you the most.